Hello everyone, my name is Jared Simmons. I am giving this presentation on POP3S and SMTPS. POP3S stands for Post Office Protocol 3 Secure, and SMTPS stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol Secure. It's by me, Jared Simmons, conducted for Information Security and Assurance 4220 System Security 2 at Kennesaw State University. And there are just a few terms that I want everyone to know before we dive into this presentation here. So the first one is POP3. POP3 is Post Office Protocol 3. It is the third and most current version of this mail protocol. So what POP3 does is it allows the client to retrieve their mail to the mail client from the mail server. And what POP3 does is it only downloads the inbox folder. It doesn't deal with any sent mail, drafts, junk mail, none of that. It only deals with the inbox folder and downloading from the mail server. So POP3S is Post Office Protocol 3 Secure. And I don't want anyone to be confused. It's not an extension of POP3, it's just a method of securing POP3, or hardening it rather. So POP3S, you can use secure sockets layer or transport layer security to configure that hardening method for POP3. So it essentially encapsulates the POP3, so the authentication credentials are secure when they're being transmitted. And SSL is the secure sockets layer. It is a form of encryption that you can use if you want to use POP3S. SMTP is simple mail transfer protocol. And what SMTP does, unlike POP3, POP3 allows for the retrieving of mail from the mail server, whereas SMTP allows the client, or the user rather, to send mail to the mail server. So this is what's allowing you to move from the mail client and talk to the mail server and get the mail you're sending over to the mail server. SMTPS, just like POP3S, is just a method, not an extension of SMTP. It's just a method of hardening SMTP. And TLS is transport layer security, and this is just like SSL. This is another way. It's just another form of securing those communications, because there's authentication that's required, and TLS is a way that you can encrypt those credentials for the authentication when that data is being transmitted. Okay, moving on just to some technical details of POP3S. So POP in general, Post Office Protocol, it's a mail protocol used to get mail from the server to the client, as I explained in the previous slide. So a benefit of Post Office Protocol is that you don't need a network connection for this to operate for what it's used for. So if you're not connected to a network, you can still, Post Office Protocol allows you to still retrieve mail from the mail server. And as far as storage goes, once Post Office Protocol downloads to your inbox, it takes the mail from the mail server. The email account now is using less storage on the mail server, so you're actually freeing up storage in the process. And the S on POP3 in the title of this slide comes from secure, and that comes from SSL. This is the secure sockets layer. You would use this because Post Office Protocol requires authentication. It's a security measure, but it's not encrypted, which means that these credentials are being transmitted in clear text. And when it's in clear text, it's not secure. If there is an attacker that wants these credentials and you're not using a secure sockets layer to encapsulate these credentials, then they can see the username and password clear as day. That's why they call it clear text, because it's written out clear as day. So if you encapsulate it with SSL, thus making it POP3S, not just POP3, your credentials are now secure, and you can have full confidence in that your information is being protected. Moving on to SMTPS technical details. So the simple mail transfer protocol secure, just like POP3S, is just an extension. It is not an extension. It's not an extension of SMTP. And you can use TLS for authentication encryption. TLS is the transport layer security. It works just like secure sockets layer. But at this time, the mail is outgoing because we're using SMTPS. That's what's allowing us to send from the mail client to the mail server. So when this happens, authentication is still required. Basically, the transport layer security encapsulates the credentials just as SSL does in the POP3S, and it protects those credentials from being transmitted in clear text. So it is now secure. So basically how that works is it secures it at the transport layer. When using SMTPS, it secures the and when I say it, I'm referring to the credentials for authentication. It secures it at the transport layer by encapsulating SMTP inside the transport layer security or secure sockets layer. I use TLS just because this is just what I would use if I were doing it. You can also use secure sockets layer. So basically how SMTP works, though, the client and the server, they communicate via SMTP at the application layer, but the connection is hardened by transport layer security, or SSL, whichever you prefer. This secure connection occurs when the TCP connection is established prior to being transmitted from the server to the client. So the TCP connection, it's not established. It's established before the mail is being transmitted, because once the mail is ready to actually be transmitted, that's when the authentication credentials are going to be transmitted. So that connection isn't going to be made until it's secure, and then it makes the connection because it knows it's okay to transmit this data in a secure manner. So services that talk SMTPS, they usually have dedicated ports. And SMTPS, it'll be using port 465. And that's actually the case with POP3S as well. It does. I'm just going to go back to POP3S real quick, just because it does have a dedicated port as well, which is going to be 995. So if you are using POP3S, that will be the dedicated port for secure transmission of those credentials. And moving on to the hardening of POP3 and SMTP, the hardening is pretty straightforward for these two protocols. Basically, standard POP3 and SMTP protocols are not encrypted. Your credentials are being transmitted unencrypted in clear text. So you'd want to configure the communications to talk via POP3S or SMTPS, depending on what you're doing, whether you're trying to retrieve the mail or send the mail. which is why you choose between POP3S or SMTPS. Once it's encapsulated, the communication does not transmit in clear text. So this would be the hardening method for these two protocols. It just depends which one you are using. So essentially, you're focusing on just encapsulating and encrypting these credentials that are required for authentication. And lastly, this is my works cited slide. These are the references I use for the information in this presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed and has a nice day. Thank you.